Welcome to the Innovators and Investors podcast. I'm Kristian Marquez, founder and CEO of Finstrat Management. At Finstrat, we provide CFO-led accounting, finance, and reporting services to assist clients monetize their business. Stick around to the end of the podcast and I'll share how you can be our next guest. Now on to the show. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Innovators and Investors podcast. I'm your host, Kristian Marquez, founder and CEO of Finstrat Management. Super excited because with us today we have Kyle Mounts, general partner at Aero X Ventures and managing partner at Singularity Capital Advisors. Kyle, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Kristian. Appreciate it.
Oh, our pleasure. And let's start with Aero X. I think I can infer by the name, but would love to hear the fund's investment thesis.
Aero X Ventures is a deep tech early stage venture firm. We're focused primarily in aerospace and defense. We target late seed to Series A capital. We write checks of kind of $1 to $1.5 million out of Fund 1, which is about fully deployed. And we reserve follow-on capital anywhere between kind of $500K to $1 million. We've made 9 investments to date, primarily across ecosystems of digital engineering, visual navigation software for GPS denied. Geospatial intelligence is a big bucket for us that we really are bullish on. And we've made a few investments across a number of verticals, including satellite geospatial intelligence, city infrastructure, and also complex environments like mining. We've made investments across robotics and different types of digital engineering, but mostly around the manufacturing process and R&D. And we've continued to look at different areas of cyber. We tend to not focus too much of our capital deployment on operators or OEMs, just by kind of nature of Fund 1 and the size check that we have to deploy and making sure that can extend as far as possible for capital efficient businesses. But right now we're headed towards Fund 2. We'll be a $100 million fund. We'll write checks, same strategy, but a little bit larger check, around $5 million initial, take on a little bit more ownership for companies that are raising anywhere between kind of 5 to 25 million. So that ownership stake in today's world around the late seed Series A puts us at ownership anywhere between kind of 5 and 25%.
Got it. A bunch of questions, but before we get into it on the fund side, Singularity Capital Advisors, what background can you give us?
Yeah, so interesting how that got started. In venture, you've got to do a couple things really well. You've got to source and select the right investments. You've got to manage those investments, and then you've got to exit on those investments, and arguably exit being probably the most important part of that business equation. So we have been looking at ways to become experts in exiting. So by nature of where the industry, at least where we sought it going in the consolidation, we wanted to become experts in exiting. That doesn't mean that we're going to represent every portfolio company that we have. We run a very fair and non-conflicted process through the selection of investment bankers in our portfolio. But arguably, we're going to do a pretty good job when representing one of our portfolio companies, but mostly mid-sized companies as a target for just straight boutique M&A advisory, buy-side, sell-side advisory. We are staying very disciplined with defense and national security. That's an area where we feel like we have a lot of expertise and deep tentacles into. So those relationships that have been not only cultivated on the investment side have now really started to cultivate on the buyer side, and other companies that are not just looking to raise capital, but looking to sell. And we think we can do a really good job of it. So that's where Singularity Capital Advisors was born. So that's an early stage for us. We've just started to build that out in that team, but we expect that to be a pretty successful business.
And I think that's brilliant, at least with the venture capitalists that I've interacted with. You're the first who's taken a more broad view of the life cycle of one of your portfolio companies to say, hey, let me see what I can do to help earn this multiple here. While we're on the subject, I'm curious, what's your sense? Do you foresee it being more traditional advisory, or would you even go so far as to say, hey, we're going to actually see if we can't make a marriage here?
It's really going to be straight sell side advisory primarily, probably 80% of our business, but 20% of our business, because of our network with buyers, has been either representing or structuring larger transactions. And strategically, it gives us, just on the investor side, much better insight to how companies are being valued and sold later downstream, especially with the past couple of years of how the venture market has been somewhat inflated. Big question is, where does that right price entry and that entry price? And it just gives us a little bit better insight to where we think we need to be on entry price to ensure that we're getting the kind of multiple that venture LPs expect.
I think it's brilliant on a lot of fronts. So I 100% agreed on market intelligence. I think that's great. Consistently hear conversations between founders and VCs of saying, hey, how do we value this? I'd also think it does an even better job of attracting potential portfolio companies and LPs,
Yeah.
knowing that your breadth of capabilities is much broader than just traditional VC. And so with that, I'd be curious to know, so just normal life cycle, you identify a portfolio company, how hands-on or hands-off is Aero X with dealing with the companies in the fund?
So we're fairly hands-on, right? But it does vary depending on the types of investments we make and or the strategy or life cycle of that company. It's funny how Aero X got started, which is probably an important backstory. Aero X, the brand, actually started as a nonprofit community development initiative, and currently today is a 501c6, 501c3 out of the state of North Carolina, receiving state grant funds directly from Commerce through the Department of Transportation to build out all of the core infrastructure for commercial drone activity, primarily in commercial and package delivery, medical package delivery, with kind of small payload drones, mostly in the medical space right now between distribution centers of major hospital systems across North Carolina. But we've also been partnering with large utility providers like Duke Energy and others like Crown Castle that own the infrastructure of cell towers to really enable a lot of infrastructure inspection with the use of commercial drones. And then public safety is also that big last application that's being used broad across the state. We set up the first drone as a first responder for 911 emergency response in North Carolina, and actually received the largest beyond visual line of sight waivers across the US of the 11 different cities today that are enabling drones with public safety application. So the reason why I bring that up is because we started that back in 2017, 2018. And that gave us a lot of insight to where, number one, where the market was moving on the commercial side with drones, but overall where aviation was headed. And we saw a lot of disruption coming with lower cost materials, more fuel efficient equipment, better manufacturing processes, right? So that commercial drone application was just a very small insight to a larger disruption, which we think is really going to span over the next 20 to 25 years. And it was interesting when we put out the RFI for the core infrastructure that's enabling beyond visual line of sight for these commercial drone applications, we got, over 500 applications through that process, and the majority of which were all smaller companies, early stage companies. And actually, the majority of them had already had successful businesses servicing the defense side. So it gave us a little bit of insight to say, hey, this is actually not only a market that is undergoing very big disruption, but it's also being enabled by these early stage companies. And is there an investment strategy? And ultimately, that's where Aero X Ventures was born, in deciding, yes, there's an investment strategy here, and we need to be in the forefront of it. So we launched Aero X Ventures back in 2021, built out the team, made a lot of investment into the people that we brought on board, primarily to fill the gap of knowledge that we didn't have, which was the DoD application. And we started the firm thinking that this was going to be a 20 to 25-year life cycle of a very sophisticated, institutionalized investment firm. And we could have gone kind of up and down the capital stack, but we felt like venture was the first opportunity. We know that growth equity will eventually become an opportunity for either raising a larger fund or supporting different kind of growth equity investors through our partnerships. But we've always looked at aerospace and defense as the market where we want to become experts in being able to service at every single point where we think the industry is evolving, right? So by just nature of where we think we're at in that life cycle, that's why we chose venture. And that's why today Aero X Ventures is focused on early stage, but eventually that'll evolve right into kind of a multi-stage investment firm.
I hear you loud and clear. A tremendous amount of disruption is taking place in the marketplace. If I think about path of least resistance, there's going to be use cases or missions that are lend themselves to being disrupted more than others. It was great to get your perspective of where you see that taking place first.
Right now, for the three applications that I mentioned, which is medical and package delivery with small payloads, infrastructure inspection, and public safety. Those are the three major applications today that are being utilized by small UAVs or unmanned air vehicles. Today, you can fly drones within visual line of sight, which is if you're in construction or if you're specifically in infrastructure inspection with utility substations, right? You can fly a drone around that substation, or you can fly a drone around that construction property, or in public safety applications, so long as you're not in controlled airspace and you've got a guy with drones, eyes on that drone the entire time, you can fly that to either with an active shooter scene or 911 emergency response to pick up data before some of the authorities arrive, right? There's just an obvious applications that you want to just get eyes on the ground sooner than later. The next step up is being able to specifically analyze what it is that you're seeing, right? So if you're taking, for example, utility and or gas and oil applications for major substations, there's a couple things. They care about gas leaks, they care about certain methane leaks, they care about certain security measures that are taken, and you need specific types of payload intelligence to be able to analyze that real time without having eyes on that drone at all times, or at least eyes on the ground, right? So if that video feed, rather than having someone in a room monitor that the entire time, you want to be able to automate that. And that's where the software sophistication comes in, and that's where the application for companies and how they're built into this market, which is what is the specific reason why that drone is looking down, and what kind of operational insights can it provide to the operator, and how can that be automated, right? So that reduce cost across the board. When you look at labor, just the inherent labor cost that these companies are using to either monitor or diagnose real time what's going on the ground. So it's by really delivering faster insights and automated insights with the use of drones. And those applications really expand across the board, right? It's taking real-time 3D imagery of a city infrastructure and being able to analyze it for engineering purposes, or engineering companies are using these drones to, and or even just 3D mapping with LiDAR, and being able to make more efficient decisions on bidding for very large scale projects on kind of city renovation or kind of big city projects. And so you're seeing much more efficiency across the board, which is reducing labor cost and adding in new revenue streams that these companies didn't have before, right? So that's where some of the biggest movers are for commercial drone activity. Now, on the logistics side, it's going to be last mile delivery, middle mile delivery. Last mile is going to be more smaller payload stuff, getting stuff from when someone orders something from a Walmart, getting it to their house. The middle mile is really for large parcel companies, moving stuff between large airports to other distribution facilities that eventually get those smaller packages to individuals' homes. Now, the downside is on the logistics side, that market has not opened up as fast as we thought it was going to. You talked, really, Amazon was talking about delivering something via drone back in 2013, but little did they know the FAA existed, and they really had no rules or operating authority to be able to take on the capacity that would be needed to really do exactly what they do with air traffic control today. So right now, it's left up to the states to determine those rules and monitor that activity, and it's up to private industry to adopt the equipment needed to operate at scale, which today, most of those companies will not invest in the core infrastructure that they need to be able to actually operate those drones in urban environment, nor do they want to deal with the FAA. So that's where the nonprofit was born, and being able to fill that gap between key stakeholders in industry and the state also not really knowing how to manage exactly what FAA would do at a large scale. So that's where we've now been working not only with North Carolina, but other states across the country to do a copy, cut, and paste of the industry association that's driving a lot of that. So I hope that helps.
No, it does. And obviously, you're a wealth of information on the subject. So I got some more and I want to take advantage of it. Two-part question. Anecdotally, I understand that at least until recently, a lot of drone manufacturing software is taking place in China. And obviously, that could be a concern when you're talking critical infrastructure or defense. And so, part one is would love to get your perspective on market opportunity for American manufactured and coded hardware and software. And the other part is we're recording this late Q4 2024. It's going to be a Trump administration for the next 4 years. So far, I've heard conversation around deregulation for crypto and electric vehicles. Would love to hear whether or not you've heard anything else around drone technology in the FAA.
So the FAA has really opened up in the past couple of years, especially through congressional authority and kind of not only the US recognizing that we need rules and regulations, but the FAA needs manpower to be able to get this through some of the kind of minimum standards that you would expect within our monitored airspace, which is mostly driven by safety. You need very strong safety use cases. We have a very low default and failure rate in our ecosystem, which is, if you compare it across the globe, it is the best, right? There's hardly no risk to flying today, and FAA wants to keep it that way. Now, however, that has put us in a really unfortunate position where, because our rules and regulations are so good and tight on how you build aircraft, how you operate aircraft, and how you maintain aircraft, and then who has the authority to fly for commercial hire, i.e. Part 135 operations and Part 121 operations, the government is unfortunately behind as compared to other parts like China, Russia, India, right? Some of the countries that just, they can do things faster because the technology exists today, right? Because they own that airspace. They have a little bit more ability to get this technology to commercial application much faster than the US. And we're behind, and we have been behind for many years. I would say that on a scale from 1 to 10, where's the enthusiasm and the willingness to work with private industry to get this going, I'd put it at an 8 or a 9. Now, 3 years ago, probably like a 2 or a 3, right? We would talk a good game, but we weren't doing much. We'd create a whole bunch of committees, in which, by the way, we served on a few national committees and advisory councils and all the above. But we kept talking and we didn't really do anything. And that was not the intent. And the intent of especially what we're doing is we're doers, we're not talkers. And we're out there trying to build out a use case that will enable scale and commercial stakeholders to start using this tech as soon as possible. And that includes eventually urban air mobility, right? Flying taxis. Joby has done a phenomenal job. We're close with them. They're now starting to launch what's expected, hopefully 2025 operations in New York, just transferring from downtown New York to LaGuardia or JFK. And we'd like to see that scale very quickly. We think, again, this equipment is cheaper, it's safer in most cases, and it's much less to cost to maintain. And it's more efficient than the gridlock that we have on our interstate highway when trying to get to the airport, right? We need to de-stress the congestion of our current highway and transportation system. And that is going to be enabled and has to be by going up. And that's through urban air mobility and eventually commercial drone application through kind of delivery. And that's where the big market unlock, that's the $1 trillion opportunity by 2040 that McKinsey puts this at. And that's the conservative estimate that we're looking at. But there's a lot of value to be unlocked by this tech today. And that's primarily where we've been focusing investment.
Before we wrap up the subject, would love to get your perspective on the impact that the Ukraine war has had on either adoption, acceptance, or evolution of drones and warfare.
Yeah, putting all politics aside, that war, which we do have a portfolio company that's been on the front lines for the past 9 months over in Ukraine, delivering critical technology I can't talk about here, but it's been a game changer. I hate to say that war drives innovation, but in this case, you've got people on the front lines in Ukraine or Russia using off-the-shelf drones to drop bombs on certain critical infrastructure of Ukraine and causing a lot of deaths. You have to fight back, right? You've got to fight back, and that has really opened up the eyes of a lot of key legislators on how important this technology is on the front lines. Intelligence, surveillance, or reconnaissance application, ISR, has been in the DoD, for 2 decades plus. It's not a new thing, but how drones now are being used is what has been evolving and changing, and that has really been emphasized by what's going on in Ukraine. I would say that it hasn't driven innovation. It's just opened up the eyes, right? It's opened up people's eyes to what is happening and what's possible. Wars going forward, not going to be fought the same way that we thought about war being fought with boots on the ground. Things are changing, and we need to adapt.
Probably devote another podcast to that subject.
I have to bring one of our board members on because they're much better articulating what's going on, especially our kind of ex-generals, et cetera.
Wow. I think it's been super insightful. And I also see, unfortunately, we're nearing the end of our time. Before we do, a couple more questions. And probably portfolio companies is a great segue. Would love to gain your perspective as an investor, as when you're looking at potential investments, of what matters most to you.
Capital efficiency. Now, of course, just the obvious things that every venture investor is going to want: an experienced and established team and a leader that knows what they're doing. I'm putting that to the side as the obvious. You want talent, team, and technology to all be big check marks. But beyond that, we're looking for businesses that have shown that they can use capital wisely. What have you done with the investment dollars to date, and what value has that created? And what value are you creating for your customer? Because business is the same. Doesn't really matter if your customer's Department of Defense or if your customer is another commercial stakeholder. You have to be able to show that you're driving value. And we want to see dollars not only being spent wisely, but a company that knows how to capture the value that they're creating, and that business equation resulting in a very profitable business, right? So I would tell you that everything's case by case, but overall, if you can show not only that you've used capital from investors wisely, but that you're in the right space for delivering value, and you can actually show that you've captured that value through positive unit economics, like, we're excited about that. Because what we're going to do is we're going to come in and we're going to accelerate sales timelines and or open up new channel partnerships and really leverage what you've done really well to generate outsized returns for all the shareholders, right? Through our connections. That's what we're active. We want to drive value when we partner with you through really key sales and accelerating your timeline towards sales, opening up key channel partnerships, adding new talent to your team through our network, and or bringing in additional investors through our entire investor network, right? We're investor collaborators. We have a very deep network of other funds that are like-minded that can also bring additional capital. So when we get behind you, we're behind you all the way. And we want to know that you're ready to take that kind of value and that value creation that we're providing, you can take it on. So that's more or less what we're looking for.
No, I think it makes good sense. I think a lot of times founders don't necessarily appreciate that if they're accepting a check from investors, that they're absolutely looking for a return on that, and how efficient you can be with those dollars is a big deal, and I think maybe doesn't get enough emphasis. Kyle, before we wrap up, last question. What advice would you give to your younger self now that you're many years into this, as you reflect back?
Great question. Hold on tight, because you're about to embark on a journey you did not expect, for sure. But keep your head down and take it day by day, because there's definitely an opportunity on the other side waiting for you.
I love it. And I think a lot of times we don't give enough credit to investors like yourself who make capital available for early stage companies who are doing great things. And it's not easy. And that's hard. It's a lot of work, not only managing the fund, but investor expectations and identifying great companies.
I love it. That's what I was put on this earth to do. I truly believe that.
Great. Kyle, if there are any co-investors, LPs, potential portfolio companies that want to get a hold of you, where can they find you?
Yeah, aeroxventures.com and or singularitycapadvisors.com, but on all your traditional media outlets, including LinkedIn. Yeah, just please reach out anytime. Happy to talk.
Kyle, thank you again for our audience. Kyle Mounts, General Partner at Aero X Ventures, Managing Partners at Singularity Capital Advisors. Kyle's great podcast. I appreciate your time.
Likewise. Thank you.
Kristian Marquez here. Thank you so much for listening to the Innovators and Investors podcast. If you're a successful founder or an investor who would like to be on the podcast, please visit podcast.finstratmgmt.com/podcast-guest. If you've got something out of this interview, please share this episode on social media. If you know someone that would be a great guest, please tag them on social media to let them know about the show and include the hashtag Innovators and Investors. I'd love to see your posts and suggestions. We're regularly putting out new episodes and content. To make sure you catch each new episode, please subscribe to the Innovators and Investors podcast. And your thumbs up, ratings, and reviews go a long way to help promote the show, and it means a lot to me and my team. Would you like to know more? Go to our website, finstratmgmt.com, or follow us on LinkedIn or on X. Our handle is @finstratmgmt. This is Kristian Marquez. Thank you for listening. Until next time.